Welcome, everyone, to the Albi Afterhours podcast. My name is Alex Duda, founder and CEO and Albiware, and the host of this podcast. Super excited to have a very special guest on the podcast today, and that is the man, the myth, the legend, Anthony Nelson. For those of you who probably know him as the "My CRM is tied together by bubblegum and duct tape at the RIA conferences" guy, this is Anthony.
Right on, man. Thank you for having me.
Welcome, Anthony. Thank you for coming. How are you doing on this wonderful Monday morning?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Well rested, so that's always good. I don't always sleep well.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Where are you calling in from, by the way? Tell everybody. Rub it in everyone's faces.
So I live in Makawao, Hawaii, which is up on the mountain in Maui. Right now we are sitting in a carport I converted into my office, and yeah, this is where the magic happens right here.
Oh wow, awesome, cool. Yeah, I don't want you to rub it into everybody's faces, but you must have
People
some pretty
don't like
beautiful
that, man,
weather
and
out
I
there
will tell you
in
that
Maui.
particularly Midwest folk get really damn feisty when you start talking about the weather. Especially in the winter, they get really feisty. And so I learned a long time ago to just completely downplay how awesome my existence is so I don't piss people off.
Yeah, I mean, we have to deal with, super balmy weather here in the Midwest and, gloomy days. And then there you are sitting and having very beautiful weather.
Well, I'm originally from Detroit, right?
Oh, yeah? I did. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, you did explain that for a little bit.
Yep. Yeah.
And you moved from Detroit to Maui.
Correct. In 2009.
Awesome. So, Anthony, you're a restorer. Many people know you as the CEO of Premier Restoration of Hawaii. Can you tell everybody kind of your story, how you got into restoration? I know everybody's got these cool, unique stories on how they stumbled upon this marvelous industry. So tell us more about your story, where you come from, how you got into restoration.
Sure. So I always say none of us were sitting in the sandbox at 5 years old going, we want to go rummage through basements filled with poop and make lives better, but we all end up here some way, shape, or form. My story is probably no different than a lot of other people. I was 18 years old. I had a job where I sprayed lawns in the summer, and in the Midwest in Michigan, you look for your winter job when you have a summer job, and I was looking for a winter job and stumbled across a company called Coach's Catastrophe Cleaning and Restoration Services, which would later go on to be acquired by Belfour. Worked as a technician in the field for probably 5 years, through various levels. Started cleaning carpet, worked my way up to, running projects, and then got the opportunity to open the Lansing location. So I was the guy that Tim Fagan trusted at 25 years old to go open a branch location, and forever and ever and ever I will be indebted to him because he rolled the dice on somebody and took some risk that I don't know that I would have done, but I think we both smile and look back on that and say, hey, that worked out really well for the both of us. Moved to Hawaii in 2009, started with a company called Maui Fire and Flood. We had 8 employees. Spent 7 years growing that business from 8 employees to 50 and right around 10 million in annual revenue. And then something weird happened. All these Honolulu boys decided they wanted to open Maui-based locations, and I said, you know what? Hell with that. Let's go ahead and strike back and open a location in Oahu. So we went through an acquisition at that point, rebranded as Premier Restoration, and then started the process of opening our location on that side. And yeah, opened in Big Island in 2018 and Kauai in 2021, and we're the first restoration company to have brick and mortar locations with real teams on all 4 islands in Hawaii.
Oh, wow. And you did a lot of that, you said, through acquisitions. You went in and acquired smaller fish in each of the islands. Is that right?
Some of it was. So Oahu, we bought 3 different companies in Oahu, and then Kauai was an acquisition, but Big Island we bootstrapped. So kind Kind
Got
of
it.
did all of the above based on what opportunity was available at the time.
Got it. Really cool. Really cool. So tell me more. I'm kind of intrigued, and one of the things that I think you could bring to your podcast here is, tell me what the difference was between the bootstrap company and growing via acquiring another company within the space. Like, what were the pros and cons to both?
Well, when you buy somebody, you can grow faster. Like that's the intention with buying somebody. But with respect to that, not only do you buy their client list, which is where most of the value lies, and their assets, right? Like everybody loves more equipment. No restorer is like, oh, I'm sad I have 50 extra air movers. But the real challenge is you buy the entire history of that organization, regardless of whether how it's structured, right? Most deals are structured as an asset sale. So technically on paper, you're just buying the assets, but really you're buying that entire company's history. And so for us, one major challenge that we had with one of the companies that we purchased is they were an older company, and they did not follow IICRC to the level that they should have. They had a lot of legal exposure as a result of that. And so we had a lot of our clients that were expecting us to show up and extract and dry category 3 water environments. And it took us about a year and a half to walk through the process of either converting those clients over to a position where they understood the value of what we were doing, or just finally agreeing to disagree that we were not
Terminate.
going to do work together and it just wasn't going to work.
I see. Makes sense. Now, what were some of those pros of like growth, right? Like, um, overall.
So I will say in Oahu, we went from zero to about $10 million in annual revenue within about 2 years. Some of that was through acquisition, some of that was through organic growth. And I would say it's probably half and half if I had to guess. We were in hyper growth mode, so our analytics weren't that great at the time. We were just struggling to get estimates out the door and produce work. Um, but it's a good way to grow fast. But I would caution everybody, if you're looking at a competitor in your market and you want to purchase them, the quality of that company and the alignment of their values with yours, the more closely you are aligned, the easier it will be to service their customers and then take care of their employees. And so, if anything, like we did 4 acquisitions. There are 2 that went well and 2 that we really struggled with. And the 2 that went well were organizations that we had close value alignment with.
So it's very important for the two companies to be similar in some sort of sense, right? Because your customer bases, your employees expect you to deliver the same thing that they got sold on in the first place.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
And
they'll jump ship, I
I'll
assume.
say it like this. It's like the establishment of core values, right? Everybody's like, oh, integrity. Like we have integrity. That's a core value. But I'll tell you what, there's a lot of gray in integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And what integrity means to Alex is probably different than what integrity means to Anthony Nelson. And so having conversations up front about all those things and digging a level deeper, and even looking at how job files are documented. I was always a big fan of getting in the truck and rolling out with the crews and seeing how work got done in the field, because that's really where you want to have synergy.
So walk me through like when you're acquiring these companies, like how do you come up with what the price is to acquire that said competitor, or in your case, another company in the market, and how do you come up with the funding to be able to afford to purchase a competitor? Were you in a very cash positive position? You guys were just funding these deals yourselves, or did you get external financing?
So when we became Premier Restoration Hawaii, we took on a capital partner, and that provided the capital that we needed for the acquisitions. Um, well, I would say
Got it.
half of the acquisitions. The other half of the acquisitions we did fund with cash later on. So it's possible to do it
Got it.
either way. The challenge is when you go to buy somebody and you're trying to establish a value, particularly on a smaller company, it can be really challenging because owners like to bury a lot of, I'm not going to call it personal expense. I'm going to call it discretionary expense within their organizations to avoid taxable liabilities, right? And so typically there's a process of
Yep.
identifying those and deducting those to determine the true EBITDA of the company. So then that way you can apply the multiple and make the purchase. Um, it was interesting walking through our
Got it.
industry in this last round of acquisitions because multiples, used to be like, hey, if you were 5 million bucks in annual revenue, you were 10%, 15% at the bottom line, you could reasonably expect like 3x, 4x. But you kind of threw the rule book out the window the past couple of years. And there was a whole slew of intangible factors that started to come into play to determine the value of an organization or not.
And do you think that's because of the fact that M&A activity has increased in the industry and now owners are like, oh, there's more demand for this, so therefore, my expectation for value go up?
I think that's part of it. And I think a lot of owners who probably wouldn't have sold took the opportunity to sell the past 3 to 5 years. I think the fact that debt
Yep.
was really, really cheap, and then, restoration companies somehow became a hot commodity in the eyes of PE firms. Like those two things kind of layered into a storm. But my personal assumption is that we're riding the tail of that wave down, and I expect things to get a little more normal moving forward.
Now, without getting too uncomfortable and disclosing too much, do you mind talking a little bit about that capital partner? Were they like a minority stakeholder? Were they a majority stakeholder? How much did they influence your ability to operate the business?
So they were a majority stakeholder. In fact, in the last round, I actually had what was called phantom stock or phantom equity in the business. So it wasn't true percentage, it was a percentage that would be awarded based on a formula in the event of a capital event. So whether we refinance or whether we sold the business. Um, First round, it was good. I made some money and I was happy. But you do trade full autonomy of your business, and now all of a sudden you're accountable to somebody. And when I go back to, so
Yep.
the former owner of Maui Fire and Flood is a gentleman named Steve Blinder. He's a good friend of mine, and when it was just Steve and I, it was very simple to decide what the direction of the
Hmm.
organization was. I'd call him up and be like, hey, here's the problem. Here's kind of the solution. What do you think? And he'd go, yeah, that sounds good. Let's do it. Or, you know what? You hadn't thought about this. Here's a couple more ideas. But um, we weren't, we were less concerned about providing return and more concerned about running and operating a good business. And then, when you take on that capital partner, performance becomes a bigger part of the equation. And I think that there's some variability with that too, because some PE guys, the conversations I have, they have the same aspirations to grow great businesses and will make decisions that negatively impact valuation to create great businesses still. I don't think there's a constant there. Just because you get PE money involved doesn't mean that ultimately you're serving just the bottom line. But don't kid yourself, it's going to be more important.
So then, if we have people listening here and they're, thinking about growing a business with outside capital, right? And I've actually, by the way, parentheses, I've after raising venture capital for Albi and growing Albiware
Yeah.
in the venture game, right? I've kind of been very interested in the PE model within restoration.
Hmm.
Just because, growing it without PE money, I could only see the opportunity with PE money. The only problem I see, and the only thing that I'm super worried about, is the fact that there aren't minority stake PE investors in the restoration space yet. So, like in venture, right, at Albi, we gave away a small piece of the pie, right? The
Hmm.
founders, Shamuel and myself, still have full control. We still have full control over the
Yep.
vision, things like those. It sounds like in restoration, you really can't, and probably because EBITDA multiples are low and things like those, but you really can't like give up just like 20% of the company or 30% of the company for a couple $1 million or whatever. Like you have to take in tens of millions of dollars for 70% of the company. Is that what you're seeing too?
Yeah, that makes sense. And then I think that it's new in the realm of PE, right? Whereas software, right? Like since the 90s, software has
Yep.
kind of been like people have been raising money to build software since the 90s, whereas every restoration company was,
Exactly.
either bootstrapped or handed down through the generations, right? And so I think it's just new. Um, and then I talk about this a lot. The demand curve for a restoration company's services. Like if you look at the end user, the demand curve for our services is inexistent until you have an event, and then it goes through the roof. You could not need us more when you have an event, and then it goes away after we take care of it. And so it's very, very
Yep.
volatile. And I,
Yep.
I think that the profile, like, you gotta like doing Vegas high stakes shit to enjoy running and operating a restoration business, because a lot of your success is predicated on luck. And so I
Yep.
use this analogy a lot to explain it, right? So I call it the Venn diagram of energy conservation. So you're familiar with the Venn diagram, right? Two overlapping circles. And so circle
Yep.
one is
Yep. Yep.
shit you
Yep.
really care about, and circle two is shit you can do something about. And like the lesson is spend 90% or greater of your time in the overlap. And so when you look at that
Yep.
through the lens of a restoration company, 80% of the variables that influence success or failure in your restoration company fall outside of one of those two. They're not in the overlap. And so you really have to laser focus on the 20%, in my opinion. And like, I'll just use process as
Yep.
an example, right? Having documented processes for every function of your business will inevitably set you up for success. And you don't even have to have the best process. You just have to have the ability to execute on it relentlessly. And that becomes the stability that puts you in the position to capitalize on the other 80% of variables when the opportunity shows up.
That's a very interesting way to look at it, actually. I never looked at it that way. And you're right in the sense of, as much as we try to deny it, a lot of our success as restorers has to deal with the probability of something happening to properties, right? So, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, everything we do is based off of something horrible happening to someone. It's not like reoccurring carpet cleaning or reoccurring restaurant where, clients come and eat at our place every single day.
Mm-hmm.
So, very interesting.
And then you
So,
layer in,
Anthony, question here for you. Oh,
yeah.
go ahead.
So and then you layer in the fact that so it's the fact, it's the occurrence, right? And then the fact that now there's a lot of people, particularly in the commercial space, that are chasing work. And so usually, it used to be back in the
Hmm.
day, people would say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know anybody did this. I'm so happy I found you," right? Like you were some diamond that they unearthed.
Yep.
Now, everybody's gotten wise. We have sales teams out there. And so now the added luck variable is you have to wait for your competitor to screw up so you have the ability to go capitalize on their mistake. And don't kid yourself, your competitors are doing the exact same thing. Those customers that you have right now, they're just waiting for you to screw up.
So back to our initial PE conversation, right?
Yeah.
Who do you think's the ideal person to go in and raise PE money and go in and acquire a bunch of companies in the restoration space to grow? And who do you think is not that ideal person? Like, can you give us some insight on that?
So is your question more, hey, Anthony, if I'm interviewing for potential guys to lend me money, who should I look for? Was that your question?
Negative.
Okay.
No, negative. As a restorer, right?
Yes.
Who am I? Which restorer? What is the profile of the restorer that probably going and getting PE money and adding a bunch of
Oh,
offices or acquiring a bunch of offices is a good option for? And what restorers, what type of restorer is that not a good option for?
got it. Okay. I would go back to process, right? A restorer that has documented process has, call it institutionalization. It can be a relatively flat hierarchy, but a hierarchy of sorts. Like the whole owner gets hit by a bus, does the business die tomorrow test is always a good test, right? If the owner gets hit by a bus and the
Got it.
business survives, that's a good business to buy. Or that's a good business to also
Yep.
get VC money and start growing. The other thing I would say is you got to look at markets and market saturation and ask yourself, like, because there's great restorers in smaller markets, and that's what we were at Maui Fire and Flood. Like, we had more than our fair share of the market because we were just that good, and we had an absence of competition. Like, it was a perfect storm for us. And so you got to look at the
Hmm.
neighboring markets if you were going to add a location, those types of things, and say, hey, is there opportunity? Because you don't want to put money somewhere where there's no opportunity. And then the last thing I would say is
Got it.
profitability, right? Like, if you're not running a profitable business
Hmm.
already, it's chances are you're not going to add a location and be more profitable. You're going to add a location and suck cash for a couple of years to get that location stood up and made profitable.
And then, how was the feeling? So it sounds like, when P got involved, you got to take some chips at the table. At the end, it sounds like it kind of sucked with the phantom stock. But what was the feeling like when you were able to take some chips off the table, sell some shares of your company, get some cash, and then sit in this like role of helping grow this like much larger organization? How did that feel?
So I was in a unique position, Alex, where I didn't de-escalate any risk. I was always on the opposing side. I was an operator who wanted an opportunity. I wanted equity in a business that I helped build. And so for me,
Okay.
there was never a point where I crossed that bridge and had the opportunity to de-escalate risk. Now, I will say that having an infusion of cash and connectivity, the right PE company can give you some connectivity. Like, I'm some dorky dude from the wrong side of the tracks in the Midwest. Like, I'm not a private club guy. And having people that are private club
Yep.
people to just kick doors open is super useful. Don't underestimate that. Um, and
Got it.
so really for us, it was the infusion of cash and then kind of just this upper echelon stuff that we didn't know. We didn't know where to go to connect with people and earn their business. And those were the two things that presented
Yep.
as an opportunity for us.
What else would you like to add? What is something that our viewers need to know about you or about your journey at Premier Fire and Water?
Um, for me, it's always been about the people. And, when I was a technician, the reason I fell in love with restoration was because we got the opportunity to make a difference in people's lives every day. And that was meaningful to me. And, some of us are wired with that dysfunction. Maybe our parents either loved us the right way or the wrong way, and we ended up with it. But if you have that nagging desire in the back of your mind to go take care of people, there's no better place in the world to do it. Short of maybe being a doctor, and I was never going to go to school for that long, so it wasn't in the cards for me. And as you grow as a leader, your role starts to shift. You don't necessarily become a steward of your customers, you become a steward of the employees who work for you. And so one of the things that running Premier I used to track was I called it the Tacoma metric because Hawaii brought us, they all love having a nice shiny new Tacoma. And the only thing that usually gets in the way is economic opportunity, aka if I can pay them enough money, every single one of them will have a shiny Tacoma in the parking lot. And so based on how many new Tacomas rolled in the parking lot every year, I could kind of assume a certain level of employee satisfaction therein. And then, just the knowledge of knowing, hey, we're creating economic opportunity for people who previously wouldn't have had it. And I'll say that the watching somebody grow and develop professionally to a point to where their life, not only their life is different, but their kids are going to have more opportunity as a result of working for you. Like, there's nothing more meaningful to me in the entire world than that. And so if that's what capitalism serves as this vehicle to, just let my heart run wild and take care of people in that way, then I die a happy man. And so for all your listeners who don't know, I exited Premier in July of last year. the organization was going a direction that I didn't want to go. They were trying to create a mega, call it a mega facilities maintenance company, and restoration was going to be a component of it. And I said, you know what? And like the past 13 years of growing that business was really, really hard. I've got two young kids that are 2 and 5. And I'm kind of looking at the road ahead, asking myself the honest questions. Am I the person for that? And what I want out of life. And I was like, you know what? I wasn't planning on leaving at that point, but it almost came out in conversation, right? Where I'm like, I think I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore.
Wow.
And I was fortunate. Like my wife has solid businesses, and so I had the opportunity to take some time and figure out what the hell I wanted to do next. And so, kind of using my, like there's a common theme, right? Haha, Anthony loves to take care of people. I was struggling trying to find the next thing because I knew what I was going to do next needed to have two elements to it. And I think I shared these with you at the experience, but my number one test was,
Yep.
does 16-year-old me want to kick my ass for what I'm about ready to do next? If 16-year-old me wants to kick my ass, like, no, I don't want to do it. And, like 16-year-old me was full of passion, piss and vinegar, but like did the best I've ever done at following my heart, right? And then my second test was the eulogy test, right? Is what I'm about ready to do next so profound and so compelling that somebody's going to stand up at my funeral and be like, I'm here today because Anthony Nelson did this, right? Two big tests. And so through that, I kind of decided, you know what? And just kind of a period of self-revelation, like, I never knew that I acquired so much knowledge in running businesses for the past 20 years. Like, and I never knew the value of that. And so moving forward, I'm partnering with John at Pivot to be a facilitator in his Pivot groups. And really the next group of people that I want to take responsibility for is owners of restoration companies. Because I believe if I can equip them with the tools and knowledge that they need to find success in their businesses, they then will take care of those individuals, and those individuals will put more shiny Tacomas in the parking lots. And then, I further my mission. And I just have to come to terms with the fact that I won't have near as many opportunities to throw on my rubber ducky boots and get into the field and suck water. Because I do love the technical side of what we do. There's no question.
That was very, very powerful, and I'm so happy you brought that up. And congrats on the new, I wouldn't call it a job, I would call it the new mission. That is awesome. And, one thing that stuck out for those of you listening right now, and what I want you guys to realize is we went from, rapidly growing restoration company, over $10 million of revenue, PE involved, rapidly growing, and that didn't bring happiness or whatever, brought enough unhappiness to say, look, I'm going to step away so that way I can go on this mission to search for these two things, right? The eulogy test of the 60-year-old test, which then brought him back to helping others help. And I really resonate with that. I think the rich work for money, but I think the wealthy work for passion, right? And I think there's no amount of money that could replace your passion. And I think when your passion dies, you're just done. So I'm really happy that you brought that up. And I think this is very important for our listeners here. So thank you for that, Anthony.
No, of course. And I feel like a lot of the times we talk about the nuts and bolts, but there's this overarching drive that all of us have. And we need to lean into that on occasion. And there's always seems to be some hesitation to talk about it too. Like I think society's getting a little better with it, right? Like people just kind of ripping open their heart a little bit. But and I find that if I share a story, a lot of the times the room will follow suit because it's what everybody's thinking and not talking about.
Yep. The one thing I've always noticed about the industry, and I always, kind of take it out of the industry, and I talk about firefighters. Firefighters don't make enough for the amount of risk that they take. period,
Hell
right?
yeah.
Like you're making 60 to 90 grand a year to risk your life. You're like in the highest workers' comp class. You're going into burning buildings, saving people, right? Literally saving lives. And the reason they do that is because of that calling to serve. And I actually believe the same thing of most successful restorers. Most successful restorers, in my opinion, for the magnitude of business that they're doing and the amount of stress, don't have enough financial reward. And it takes something like a greater incentive than financial reward to run a restoration company, right? And I think you hit it spot on. I think most restorers have that desire to serve at first. For the reason you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and you fix broken pipes isn't for the $5,000 mitigation job. $5,000 is not enough to get you out of bed to go and dry out a basement or, put those rubber boots on. But you do it because there's nobody else that can do it. There's a need for it, right? And then, like you said, the second step is then you create a platform through which your employees can grow through, and that's the satisfaction that you have. So, yeah, I totally agree with it, 100%.
It is interesting. I'll tell you a story. So it was raining cats and dogs once, and I had gotten on the soapbox in front of our teams and been like, our job is to take care of the community, right? Like, which means that if you see an opportunity to help somebody, you stop and you help them. Like, I'll never get mad at you for that. It was like
Yep.
36
Mm-hmm.
hours later, guys stopped on the side of the road to help an uncle like clear like debris and tree limbs and stuff out of a stream bed because it was raining up on the mountain. And the old school uncle knew, like, oh, if I don't get this stuff out of here, like, my house is gonna flood. And so a couple guys pulled over and were helping him, and I called them and I'm like, hey, like, Mrs. Jones is super frustrated because you said you were gonna be there a half an hour ago and you're not there. And they're like, well, boss, you told us to help the community, so we pulled over and we're helping the community. And I was like, I was pretty pissed when I called them, like, come on. And then they told me the story, and I'm just like, okay. And it's like, said, no problem. I'll take care of it. I hung up with them. I called our client at the time, and I'm like, they are going to be late. They're going to be about an hour late. And here's why. And she was like, you tell them to take their time, right? She went from like super pissed to like, nope, I totally get it. That is what's right. Yeah.
Well, hey, Anthony, I really appreciate your time here. I know, I respect everyone's time. They take time out of their busy days to be on this podcast. So thank you so much for that. And for those of you watching the podcast, please take a minute to like, comment, subscribe. We shared a wealth of knowledge from Anthony here. The one price to pay is to comment back. So that way we get feedback, so that way we can make these podcasts a lot better. And if you subscribe to our channel, you'll be able to see more content like this and more podcasts from wonderful people like Anthony.